So welcome everybody to today's session of the Nevada Math Faculty Co-Requisite Professional Development. Today we're going to be focusing on the online instruction for the Math Co-Requisite course. This is going to be presented by our friends over at AQ. My name is Brandon Protus. I am a strategy director at Complete College America, and we are serving as the project managers for this professional development series. We would like to start off, of course, first with a welcome from the Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs of the Nevada System of Higher Education, and that's Crystal Alba. Crystal, do you want to take it away?
Thank you. Good afternoon, good Friday afternoon to everyone. I don't know about you, but it's been a very long week, and I can't think of a nicer way actually to end the week than being with your colleagues and talking about something as important and gratifying as co-rec implementation. I will be very brief. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all for participating. I know that your days and your time is very limited, so I appreciate when you take 2 hours out of your busy week and participate in an event like this. I also would like to thank our presenters. ACU is an incredible organization, and I am so grateful for the support that they are providing for this type of event. As you know, we are a small state, a small system, and when we have the opportunity to tap into the expertise of organizations like ACU, it means a great deal. And of course, it goes without saying, but thank you to Brandon and Complete College America for their ongoing support in getting us through all of these webinars. As many of you know, we've had a number of these sessions. They have been amazingly productive. What makes them so productive is not only being able to hear from experts from the outside, but being able to share our experiences internally as we begin pilots. I know that TMCC has some amazing data for the work that they've started, and we're just at the beginning of this process, but it is already proving to be very fruitful. So with that, I'd like to again thank you all, and let's get to work. So Brandon, back to you.
Great, thank you, Crystal. I've said it before, but I always want to reiterate, Nevada is doing co-rec the right way. Complete College America has worked in more than a dozen states going to scale, and we know it works best when you have both a grass tops and a grassroots approach. And so there's a vision and policy that's been set by the state. You see the reinforcement from the welcome from the Vice Chancellor, who is fully supporting this effort. However, the topics and the presenters were chosen by the Math Faculty Task Force, who said, if we're going to full implementation, here's what we need for our faculty to get ready. So we appreciate that. Just a little bit about Complete College America, and we have our mission and vision here because it's important for us to say what we believe in, and that's one thing. It's increasing college completion rates and closing institutional performance gaps. Well, it sounds like two things. We believe you can't do one without the other, and we use the term institutional performance gaps instead of either achievement gaps or equity gaps. And so our work with Estella Ben-Simon at the Center for Urban Education out of USC, institutional performance gaps puts that responsibility on institutions, on systems, through policy, through implementation. We know, and co-requisite is probably the best example of this, we can have a significant impact on student success by the actions that we take. And in fact, with co-requisite, we've seen increases of doubling and tripling of the pass rate in the college level course. So it's important that we always situate why we're doing the work in college completion and equity. Complete College America is known for having a number of strategies, and these are divided into 4 pillars of purpose, momentum, structure, and support. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but I want to point out that co-requisite support is one of our longest game-changing strategies. We produced a report almost a decade ago called Bridge to Nowhere that was followed up by Spanning the Divide, and we're coming up with a new signature report just in the next few weeks that shows the power and the promise of co-requisite support. So we salute Nevada for going to statewide implementation because we know that for co-requisite to make a difference with all students, and particularly with racially minoritized students, Black, Hispanic students, you have to do it at scale so it has the impact on all students. So Nevada, you're doing it. Nevada, you're doing the absolute right way. Now I know you're in front of a computer, so we'd love for you to go to completecollege.org. You can sign up there, and by creating a profile, you'll have access to resources, upcoming information, our publications, our newsletters. It's a great way to stay in touch, not only with Complete College America, but with all the change makers who are part of that. And finally, as I mentioned, this professional development opportunity is part of an entire series, and I'm dropping a flyer for that into the chat, both so you can see our final upcoming sessions in April on the growth mindset and effective learning, as well as the assessment of the co-requisite SLOs, but also the past ones that have already happened, either for you or your colleagues. These have been recorded and they're available on the NSHE co-requisite website, which is also in the chat right now. It's a great way to get ready for the full implementation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to AQ, and we have Penny McCormick and Nicholas Shea who are going to be presenting today on the online instruction of the co-requisite math course.
Thank you, Brandon.
Hi, everybody. Penny, you can go ahead and get us started.
You're the thanks, Nick. Hi, my name is Penny McCormick. I am the Chief Academic Officer for AQ. We are excited to be with you today. I want to say that our work largely focuses on making available to faculty the experts and practitioners who think about and actually do the work of employing evidence-based teaching practices in their classrooms and their online courses. We work to make that available in an engaging and inspiring way for faculty to learn about, and our intent is always to also try those practices in your online courses and classrooms. And so I'm pretty excited to have Nick Shea here with me today, who is one of those practitioners who I think you will find both engaging and inspiring in helping you learn about and be ready to try out some new techniques and practices for teaching co-requisite math in an online format. Nick?
Thanks, Penny. Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Nick Shea, and I am an assistant professor of mathematics at Columbus State Community College in Columbus, Ohio. So a ways away from Nevada, but I teach co-requisite math. I've been focused on co-requisites for about 6 years, actually. This is about the 6th year. I've been doing it online for about 2 years. And I kind of have a unique relationship with AQ because I am currently an AQ course taker as well as a facilitator. And our Association for Community Colleges in the state of Ohio offered a professional development training. Actually, I think it's 2- and 4-year colleges across the state. And we are currently about 3/4 of the way through a professional development session with AQ. And my cohort that I'm facilitating is all math and English faculty who are teaching co-requisites online. So I kind of have a unique perspective as I'm currently going through an AQ course. I'm working my way through these modules, and I'm engaging with colleagues across the state about what's going on. And as we're trying to figure things out, a lot of us didn't have a lot of experience teaching online or even online co-requisites, and then a pandemic hit and we all became online instructors. So this professional development has been a really, really great opportunity for us to be able to explore best practices. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to try to highlight a few of those practices. But before we really dig into that, I'd like to take a second and get to know a little bit more about you. So we're going to launch a poll because I like to know where we are in terms of implementations and your experiences teaching co-requisites online, as well as you guys, I know some people are in different phases of their implementation. Are you anticipating a synchronous co-requisite or an asynchronous co-requisite? So I want to give you guys a second to provide a little bit of information. It really helps us to kind of structure this to be tailored specifically to you. So there should be a Zoom poll that just launched. And if you could take a second and answer those 3 questions. Sometimes you have to scroll down to see all the questions. But there's 3 questions that I just like for you guys to go ahead and answer. We're going to give a couple more seconds for some responses to come in. Again, thank you for those who have filled out the responses. And thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing the skeletal outline as well.
So Nick, I'll close the poll in 30 seconds. So everyone, please get your answers in.
Thank you. Great. So it seems like we have a pretty good blend of some people who have experience as well as some people who haven't done this yet. Also, it seems like most people are in the piloting phase, some people are planning. It looks like we got a few people who are at scale, and that's awesome. And then I did kind of anticipate that we were going to have a blend of synchronous and asynchronous. I've done them both. I think the practices that we're going to discuss today really will be effective regardless of that. And again, I might share some things that may work better in a synchronous environment as opposed to an asynchronous. But for the most part, I think that these practices are going to be things that you can take with you. So an overview of what we're going to be doing today is AQ has a lot of modules. I think I'm on module 19 through the program that I'm working on. I've learned so much. You know, I spend about 2 to 3 hours a week on an AQ module. So I couldn't bring everything that they have to offer because it's just really difficult. So I picked 2. I picked these 2 for very specific reasons. They were some that people found the most challenging in our discipline. And the other reason is they were, when I was looking back and going through our modules that we've done, it's where we had the most engagement and discussions in terms of our faculty who are teaching online co-requisites really found the content really valuable. Now, AQ is more of like a generalist. So what I've kind of done is I've taken some of the materials and we've tried to focus it specifically towards the co-requisite itself. But I think a lot of this could apply regardless of the online math class you're going to take. And when I return to a sense of normalcy, my campus is still virtual. I'm going to be taking a lot of these practices and putting them into my in-person classes as well. So these are things that I think can help kind of regardless of whether it's asynchronous or asynchronous and regardless of the situation that you're in. The goal today is to leave with something to use. And I can't encourage you enough to use it as soon as possible. For those of you who are still in the planning phases, if you are teaching a math course, try this in the current course and then see how it would maybe work there. And if you can move that into your co-requisite course when you do get a chance to teach that co-requisite course. The sooner you use these things, the better. I don't know about you all. It seems like you have had a lot of professional development opportunities. But when I used to go to conferences, I would sit through presentation after presentation and I would file things into a folder that I got from some publisher booth. And then I would get to the end and it felt like I was drinking from a fire hose and I was just totally inundated with all of the things that were given to me. And then I put that filing cabinet, I get on the flight, put it in my filing cabinet in my office and I'd shut it and then it would stay there. And I realized that I have to really come back with very specific things that I'm going to use and pick a few of them and actually implement them as soon as possible. So to practice what I preach here in terms of powerful note-taking online, we've shared a skeletal outline. It's something similar to what AQ provides you in each module. And if you have, it's a Word document, so if you wanted to type within that document, that's great. If you have a printer handy and you want to print that and work that out with us, that would be awesome as well. So the first module we're going to launch into is providing useful feedback for online learning. And I do want to launch one more poll just to get a sense of where you guys are at and just in your experience, how many of your students effectively use the feedback you provide to improve their work? We'll give a minute for this one.
The poll will be closing in 30 seconds, so please get your answers in now.
So those of you who answered, the 5 of you who answered, 3/4 of my students in my online course are using your feedback. Awesome. I've got to be honest, I did not think that a lot of my students were using the feedback, and grading is, I have yet to meet the person who said I went into education for the grading. It's something that I really struggled with. And I still, you know, at first it still is not, it takes a long time for me to get motivated enough to really sit down and provide that feedback. But this module really did a great job of helping put some perspective into why that feedback is important. Before we start talking about feedback and how we can create effective feedback for our students, I want you to first think about what feedback is for your students. When I first started teaching online, which was, you probably don't believe this, but it was about 8 or 9 years ago. I don't look like I've been teaching that long, but I tend to blend in with my students pretty well. But about 9 years ago was the first time I taught an online college algebra course. And as far as feedback went, and what my idea of feedback was, is I had a publisher homework website, which I won't mention, and I assigned a certain number of set of problems, 30 to 35 problems a week, maybe a quiz at the end of the week. And they took it and it was self-graded and they would get a %, and then that's it. And that's the feedback, is you got a 70, you got an 80, you got a 90. I quickly realized that that's not great. A grade is not, it is a form of feedback, but it's not the best form of feedback that we could be asking our students to do. And with the advent of technology, I don't have my phone with me right now, but we have smartphones now, right? We can have our students be capturing their work and submitting that to you. And that's one of the most important things that I think has been a shift for me, especially with my online teaching, is I ask my students to capture that. If you have, there's a couple apps, one's called Cam Scanner, one's called Adobe Scan, but what they do is you can take pictures and it compiles that into a PDF, and then from their phone, they can either email that to a computer and upload it to the LMS, or some students can, who are savvier than others, can upload directly from their phones into the LMS to submit that work for you. But we had a divide when I first started teaching, where my online students, I really never saw anything they did until they took the midterm and then the final. And I would provide feedback on the midterm, but I was never really sure of how many of them would look at it. So I started to turn to having them submitting more things, you know, taking pictures of it and getting that to us and uploaded so I can look at that. And feedback's really, really important, because especially in an asynchronous course, that's your conversation. That's your ability to have a dialogue with students. You might have a student that reaches out and they may, you know, you may have a correspondence with a couple students. You may have a student want to jump on a Zoom call or give you a call. But for the most part, your feedback and that conversation you have with that feedback is the way that you have that dialogue. So let's talk about a couple different types or important facets of feedback. I got a couple things here, and we really, these all kind of blend together, but I'm going to try to touch on them individually. First of all, the feedback needs to be individualized. I've recognized that you need to somehow put your voice and acknowledge and help the student acknowledge that you're speaking directly to them. In the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about some technology that we can use to make that more effective. But you really want to let a student know that you're addressing them specifically. So I'm going to try, I understand that grading online, it's gotten really, it's arduous. It takes a long time. So I'm going to try to introduce some strategies that I think might be effective to kind of give you some time back. So a lot of times you can anticipate mistakes that are going to be coming, or you grade something and you see a student make a mistake and you're like, all right, I already know I'm going to be seeing this one a bunch. If a lot of times I got the 2-monitor thing going on. I open up the second monitor and in a Word document, I type the feedback out. And when I type that feedback out for the student, I leave the front part blank or put an ellipse there. So then when I see that mistake happen, I'll say, Sam, nice job setting this up, but, and then just hit paste, Control V, it's my best friend, Control C to grab it, Control V to put it in. And if you put just their name there, I think it does a lot to really grab their attention and let them know that, you were talking directly to them. Again, this is your conversation with the student. The next thing that's really important is that your feedback is timely. There's kind of 2 facets of timeliness that I want to talk about. First is how long it takes you to get back to them. Now, research does show that the sooner you get it back to them from when they took it, the better. So one of the things that I offer is when my students take a quiz in my asynchronous online course, I have office hours during that day. And I always tell a student that if you take the quiz and submit your work, you can join office hours. We'll go into a breakout room and I'll actually give you the feedback directly within that time. It actually saves me some time because I grade the assignment and I actually do get to give that feedback directly and have that conversation with the student. I think that's a really great way to offer that, get the student incentivized to come, because you do have those students who kind of are like, oh, what did I get? Because a lot of times those, if you do have a self-grading technology, you might be going back and giving partial credit based off of the work that they submit. So that's a good way to do that. As far as timeliness though, communicate, set a goal for yourself, communicate it to students, and then try to keep to that goal. So my personal goal is I tell my students, I try to have everything turned around in a week. Now I collect the assignments over the week and then my Saturday or Sunday morning, that's when I'm cranking out 2 or 3 hours of grading. And typically it doesn't take a full week to get that back to them. Other times, like I'm teaching a quantitative reasoning class. Quantitative reasoning exams take a really long time for me to grade. That feedback, digging into the heads of what the students are doing so the way they can go about solving a problem is so different. A lot of times it takes some time for us to be able to make sense of that. So this week, I got to be honest with you, I've been working on this presentation and I'm on a curriculum committee. We're doing a lot of revisions of curriculum right now. I have about 5 QR tests that I gave last Thursday that I have not been able to get back to these students. What I did is, again, we give students extensions, things like that. I emailed those 5 students and I communicated that to them. Again, it's this open dialogue. I let the students know, hey guys, hey everybody, I'm still working on this. I will let you guys know. I hope to have these done tomorrow morning. I'll let you know when they have been graded. I apologize for it taking for so long. That's not common for me, but I'm just having a week where it's really, really hard for me to put the time and attention towards giving you the feedback that you deserve. Students understand that. Again, that communication aspect, as opposed to just waiting a month or waiting 2 or 3 weeks before you turn something over for them. Another aspect of timeliness I want to address is when you're taking your time to put feedback in. When I was first teaching online courses, the only time I got to see student work was when they came into campus to take their midterm or their final. Now that might not be an option. You might not be bringing them to campus to take those tests. Currently, we're not doing that, but I was spending a long time grading a midterm and then I was providing a bunch of feedback on a final. And I got to be honest, a final exam is not the place to be pouring into detailed feedback to give to the student. So if your course has lower stakes assessments, I found it much more effective to spend a lot of time on feedback on those early lower stakes assessments so that you can really encourage that growth for those bigger summative assessments. So I tend to spend much more time on a quiz that's only worth 1% of their grade, and then maybe do provide feedback on that test that's worth 12, but it's a little bit more generalist because again, that we're trying to encourage that growth in those lower stakes assessments to really translate that and perform into the higher stakes. Now in the higher stakes assessments, that's a great place to convey some of that growth oriented language, which I'll talk about in a second. Next thing we really want to consider is you want it to be positive. I don't know about you, I have seen those papers where, you'll see I am not there's times where I have some grammar errors in some of the things. I actually had a student catch one today and you'll see it in a PowerPoint slide later. But you want to be positive. If a student gets a paper back and it's just loaded with that red ink or green ink or blue ink or purple ink. The color of the ink doesn't matter when it's so inundating that they can't really understand. They're not gonna, it doesn't mean anything. They typically don't internalize that. You wanna keep your feedback as specific as possible and try to make it as positive as possible, including a piece of positive work in there to say, you know, sometimes I get done with a paper and I think to myself, I've got to tell them something good about what they did. And usually you can find it. Another way to keep things positive is often you see a student make the same error throughout the document. One thing I like to do with that is when I do have a conversation or I provide that feedback for a student, I say, I know you're making the same error again and again, and I just want to tell you it's actually a good thing that you're making the same mistake, because if you were all over the board and we were making mistake A and B and C and D and E, then we'd have a lot that we need to work on. But if we can just clean up this one error, your grade is going to drastically improve, because we basically have taken, it's not like you're all over the board and you don't have any idea of what you're doing, but there's one key skill that we really need to focus in on here. And if we can fix that, you're going to see huge gains in terms of your improvement. So that's a really good way to approach that. Also, you want it to be specific. Specific feedback, meaning don't just say you need to work on factoring, but say, you know, I've noticed that you're having a hard time factoring when there's a coefficient in front of the x squared term. Again, it takes a little bit longer to write that out, but I think that is an effective way to be dealing with that. Actionable, you really want to lead the students into want to pick something up and use it. So one of the things that I typically do is when I see a common error, I may point it out, and then later in the document, I actually may just pull it off to the side, highlight this, highlight the error they made and say, why don't you fix that mistake and start again here and see if I can get the student to actually engage and finish that problem. The last thing that I think is worthwhile to touch on is growth-oriented language. This again feeds into that idea of providing that feedback on those earlier quizzes. I just gave a quiz on finding the zeros of polynomials in my college algebra Corequisite for my online class. And I have asynchronous and synchronous students in that class. And one of the things I like to do with that is I reach out to them. They just bomb that. I mean, the average before I've given partial credit is about a 35% on that quiz. Again, it's very few problems, but what I tell those students is that quiz is only worth 1%. And it does serve as a motivating factor. It gets them in there to start reviewing that. I do give that feedback throughout that process in terms of, okay, you didn't quite grasp synthetic division, or we still need to work on doing the rational roots to get that full list of possible zeros. There's really specific actionable things that we can provide to then encourage that them to really take that next step. And I like to tell them, listen, you could actually fail every quiz in my class and still get an A. But if you fail a quiz, you need to make sure that we put those improvements in place, look over that feedback, improve upon those processes so that we don't make those same mistakes when we get to the final exam. And then, or the midterm. And then really, I had a student bomb their first quiz or their second quiz, really come in and get some help from me, really knock the first midterm out of the park. And again, acknowledging that growth, celebrating that growth for that student, it really does serve as a win, and it really helps them kind of get the ball rolling. So I have two examples of feedback. I operated mostly in the first box, sometimes even less than that when I first started. John, you did good work, John. It's positive. You need to work on finding the zeros of quadratics. That's okay. Now, a common error I was seeing with this quiz is, John, you did a great job of setting up the equation to be equal to 0. I can tell that you're improving on factoring. Once you have the function factored, try setting each of the linear factors equal to 0 to find the zeros. You're really close to getting this. You can see that we're digging a little deeper in. We're making sure that we give some actionable feedback. I didn't just solve the problem. That was another mistake that I made a lot early in my career, is I would just write the solution, and students never really use that. I think that that's something that I try to pull away from. I don't provide answer keys to my thing. My worksheets I do, but my quizzes and tests don't have answer keys to them. So that's just one of the things that I think is worthwhile for us to take a look at. So let's talk a little bit about types of feedback. This is where I think we can actually use technology to our advantage, specifically in an online course. So I think with online education, most of the time we're, and correct me if I'm wrong, but for most of you, probably just typing directly into the document itself. My LMS has a system that I really don't love, but I use it because it allows me to type things in there, and then I have a general feedback box that I can provide. But targeted in-text feedback is just the baseline, a great way to, get students' comments in there. Again, I try not to write a novel, but I try to put those comments throughout there. One of the things I learned about my LMS recently, though, was it actually enabled me to have audio or video capabilities. And one of the things research has shown is that students express more satisfaction and connection when they can hear or see the instructor make those comments. So if you have the ability to maybe hit the record button as you're going through and annotating and grading, and then just hitting stop at the end when you're done and just making a comment, or grade the completely and just make 30, 45-second comments and send that out to the student. A video feedback's great. I think that's best because, again, like, you can look into the camera and say, John, you've almost got this, or Steve or Sarah, you've almost got this, but we just need to really work on that small thing here. I'm going to be supplying you with some resources into the feedback here. I'd really like you to take a look at those videos. There's just a couple small things you need to clean up on this problem, and you really got it. Now, if you're like me, when I first heard this, and in my comments with my cohort, one of the things that we recognized is this takes time. Video feedback takes time. So I would encourage, maybe just try it once or twice throughout the semester. Try it. I know you may think about it and think that it just is crazy amount of time. And you may think, I don't even know how I would do that in my LMS. I want to tell you that your IT faculty, or if you have any sort of teaching and learning support, they would love to help you figure this out. If you go to your support staff and you communicate to them that you want to start recording a quick memo to students when you grade their work, or you want to make a quick video to give some really targeted feedback, in my experience, they bent over backwards to make that work for me, because it really helped them connect with the fact that they were helping the student. I don't know about you, but a lot of times the support staff who really help us out have a hard time seeing how they're actually contributing to student learning. So whenever you can pull those people in and bring them into part of this project, a lot of times you'll see that, they really get the satisfaction behind why they took a job at a community college or a college in general. So reach out to those folks. A lot of times they can work wonders. If you don't feel like you have the time for specific video feedback for every student, it might be worthwhile to just make a weekly video where you look at the analytics, or after you finish grading, you're like, all right, I need to make sure I do problem number 3, because we all struggle with that. And you make a video and you go over the problem, or you do a similar problem and you let students know where those pain points were within the problem and go ahead and address that. It's a really nice way to kind of put your voice into it, really acknowledge. If you see the same problems, I haven't done this yet, but if you write down like, okay, this student and this student and this student struggled on this problem, you can send out an email. Don't put their name on it, but say, I noticed you struggled on number 3. You can BCC it so they don't know who got it, and you can send that targeted feedback directly to the student. The other thing that I would have handy, so like I said, I have a Word document over to the side where I'll type out a very detailed comment and I'll kind of recycle it as I'm grading these. Another thing that I do is I keep a link of resources, typically external YouTube videos, but sometimes you might want to reference a specific video in your course, and have that to either put in text or put in the feedback, or when you send a student an email, put that link in there so that a student has something to click on. So that's always a good way to have those handy. So when you're, if you go find a video, and if you make one, let's say there's one specific that you want to go over, really take the time to make one quality directed feedback, and that thing will recycle. Again, it's a time-saving measure in terms of your ability to kind of do this process again and again. It really gives you the opportunity to make something once really well and make it work for you multiple times. So feedback is great, and these are great ways to provide feedback. But one of the things that I struggled with most, and I think a lot of other people, is what do they do with it, right? I spend all this time grading. I make these videos. Are they even going to look at it? Why would I spend time making a video? I was working on this with my wife yesterday, and we hit this point in the slide, and she looked at me and she's like, why would a teacher ever do this if your students never look at it? And I said, well, that's a really, really great point, because you're right. This is your conversation with the student. This is the way that you measure their growth, is seeing them interact with this and hopefully improve on it. So in the next slide, we're going to play a video from a gentleman named Dr. Bowden, and he had an idea that really spurred some thinking with myself and others in my cohort about how we can use this feedback. So I'm going to let this play, and then we'll talk about it.
Another way to use your learning management system is to think about when you release information. So most important are the conditions. So again, a set of defaults that determine if you want to see the grade, you first have to see the feedback, or the grade is delayed for an hour. So in a normal class, I'm here for an hour, I hand back the paper, it's got a grade on it, you see the paper, your amygdala goes off, you stop, you don't read the comments, you stuff the paper into your backpack, right? All your feedback was gone to waste. So one of the most important things you can do online is separate feedback from grades. And you've been given the perfect technology tool to do that. So when you give students feedback, don't give them a grade at the same time. Hide the grade, or just conditionally release the grade an hour later, or under some other condition. Make students read the feedback that you spent so much time doing. So if you wrote in the margins, or you typed up a little summary of the mistakes, or however you did it, make sure students read that. So there are a couple ways to do that. The first is you could actually make students scroll through the whole document before they get to see the grade. If you post a video, and video feedback is really fast and easy, it also does something else. Video feedback allows people to see your face, and they get to see you, and you can talk to me like a human being, and so that creates a trust and relationship. Make sure you've watched the whole, and so until they've watched the whole video, they can't see their grade. Or you can delay the grade by an hour. Delaying grades and having feedback come first does a whole range of things, but it also creates an opportunity for self-reflection. So one way to use conditional feedback is to say, here are your graded papers or problem sets. Watch the video, read the feedback that I spent so much time on. Then do a self-reflection exercise. So now the reason you have to do the self-reflection exercise is because you can't see your grade until you do it. So I've got to fill in the form. It can be anonymous. No one ever has to see it. But the computer can now take care of this. And so when you've finished filling out, and lots of forms work this way already, until you've added something, it says, it's red, you can't go on to the next page because you haven't filled out the form. Even if they only put a word in, but make them do the reflection exercise before they see their grade. That's plenty of motivation. They don't need points for it. It does slow me down. It means I have to read the feedback, I have to think about the feedback, and then my amygdala can go crazy when I see that I got a D-. Right? Those two things have now been separated, and I actually think the best way to do it is even to delay it further. So I've done the feedback. Sorry, you still have to wait 15 more minutes before you can see the grade. Think about what you do differently next time. Go to your schedule, because this is the implementation gap that people don't do. Go to your schedule, and if you've said you're going to study more, block out time to study. If you've said you need to study in groups, find somebody before the next midterm and make an appointment with them so they'll have a phone call with you the night before the midterm so you can explain everything to them, because that turns out to be a great study technique. Make that appointment and then come back in 15 minutes and you can see your grade. And that's a technology that we didn't have face-to-face that we now have in the online. That's a huge help for learning.
So that really, I wanted to include that video because it really did change the way I kind of thought about feedback. I always thought feedback was the grade, right? And this really kind of helps us to separate that. And I actually used this strategy about 2 weeks ago. I was grading a student's midterm, and I knew the student didn't do very well. So what I did is I reached out to the student to set up a time to meet with them. Now, this was a student who had that willingness to meet with me, and we could find a time outside of hours that he was working and join the Zoom meeting. And I pulled the test up, and we actually went through that feedback, and I didn't put the grade in yet because I was really cognizant of what the grade would do cognitively and whether the student would ever want to go back and engage with that feedback. So that's something to think about. There's a couple other ways to really get students to engage with feedback, because I hear you. I didn't love grading because I didn't think students used it. So the solution for me was to find ways for students to use the feedback. In my Corequisite statistics course I taught, it's a little bit different model where my Corequisite was a separate course from the actual statistics class itself, but they had the Corec on Monday, and then on Wednesday and Friday they had the stats class. But what I did in the Corequisite section is I had students right after they took the statistics midterm take that test, and they had to pick 5 problems they missed. They had to identify where the problem came from, section, day, video, all of that. I made them solve the problem correctly. Again, we're using open notes at that point. I'm going to talk about notes in a little bit, but a great way to get them going back to their notes. Had them solve it correctly. I had them identify the error they made. And then I had them write what are you going to do before the final to make sure you got this down? Now, if a student hadn't missed 5 problems, and I'll talk about these types of students in a while, I said, just go find 5 problems you've missed in this course. I did have a student say, I haven't missed 5 problems in this course. So I said, find 5 problems you had a difficult time with and work those out. And what that really allowed the student to do is it really incentivized that feedback. I'll be honest with you. One of the beauties of a Corequisite is when I teach my college courses without the Corequisite, I am pedal to the metal for the full 15 weeks. We don't have a second to waste. I cannot spend time going back to reflect because I've got 13 more chapters I need to cover, and I can't do that. I'm handing the test out. We're moving to the next section. Corecs create that space, and I understand that you have prerequisite knowledge that you need to be hitting on, but addressing non-cognitives and getting them to engage with feedback is going to be a really, really effective way to get them to use this, to take the work that you spent time on and get them to actually engage with it. Another thing I want to share is something that we do currently in our college algebra Corequisite, and we're going to share a document. I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but we have a test reflection where we just ask the student, how did you do? What did you expect? Did where you end up on the test correlate with what you expected to do? Things like that. This is, so my students about 3 to 4 times a week have what we call the worksheet of the day, where they print this, they work it out, they take pictures of it, they submit it back to our LMS. And a lot of times they're very content driven, but a lot of times this is where we tie in that growth mindset stuff. This is where we tie in a lot of those reflective practices to really help students with some of the things that, again, a Corequisite, we're teaching them math and we're teaching them how to be an effective student. So these are great opportunities to do that. Now, if you see this, you can see that I'm not quite there yet with where Dr. Bowden was talking about in terms of pulling the grade apart from the feedback. So I'm working on this. So one thing to let you know, Columbus State, we have 27,000 students at our institution. We are the largest online institution in the state of Ohio. And now we're really huge. So we're one of the biggest colleges in Ohio, other than our big brother down the street, Ohio State, but we are one of the largest institutions we're definitely the largest community college, and we run a ton of sections. So my college algebra Corequisite, I am teaching one of 26 sections in this course. And so there's a lot that needs to go into this, and I'm working for my summer term to actually have this reflection, not have the grade part, but have them write how they did and submit that reflection before they can actually see their grade. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting feedback into the document, but actually, so actually address like what's going on in there and think about that before they actually see that grade. And then at midnight, I have it set as a time. Again, if this is something you're interested in, I think this is pretty high level stuff. And this is where I want to be. Again, I'm teaching Corequisites currently. I want to be there. I'm working with my TL, my Teaching and Learning Center, to see if we can get this done in tandem with IT. Again, great project to bring those people in, to get them engaging and help them make your student experience better. I want to take a second to answer a question about the worksheet of the day. So Christina, it's really kind of a blend of everything. So the first worksheet of the day they do is about time management. One thing I've learned about Corequisites is sometimes you have to deliver a prerequisite skill before they dig into the college level content, and that worksheet of the day is a great way to do that. Sometimes we use a worksheet of the day to reinforce a skill they may have learned that you just want to give them a little bit more time and repetition for. Sometimes we do a blend, like there's a worksheet of the day we have where we have a video on test taking anxiety. They answer a few questions. They then work on a few problems for their test review. And then one of the things that you'll see in this document is at the bottom of every worksheet of the day, it asks them to outline the tasks that are going to be coming up throughout the week. And that's a really great way to make them going back to their schedule and make sure that they're looking at that syllabus and actually answering what's coming up throughout the week. And so our worksheets of the day it's really good feedback for us. Again, it's low stakes. I will say, I think we have close to 25 or 30 worksheets of the day, and worksheets of the day comprise 10% of their grade. So we run on a weighted grade system, so they don't really know. It's one of those, the points don't mean anything. It's 35 points for this worksheet of the day, but when it's only 10% of your grade, we don't really know how that correlates. So it really, they do them, they help give us feedback. Those plus the quizzes are really low stakes ways for us to see how they're doing. And it really gives us an opportunity to check in with them. So Christina, if you want to know more about the WODs that we do, I would love to share as many as you would want. So again, I have about 40 of them that run through the course. So just let me know. And if it's a college algebra, the WODs align with our college algebra co-requisite. So if you're teaching an algebra-based course, I can kind of drive you towards specific ones that may be helpful. But I love the opportunity to give them these and really focus on some of the things that you want to make a big important part of the course that you may not necessarily want to put into a lecture video. Does anybody else have any questions before we move on to the next portion? Give a second. So really quickly, before we launch into this, will you give me a yes or no in the chat as whether or not you have ever used a Google Jamboard? Is this something that you have experience with? Have you never seen this before? It's a piece of technology that I really wanted to share with you because it's free. So if you could just enter into the chat. So Rebecca's seen it, awesome. Anybody else? Awesome.
So Nicholas, what a couple people put was, it was briefly introduced yesterday during a session on active learning, but it would certainly be great to show it again because it was just briefly introduced.
Well, good thing, because we're going to actually engage with this today. So a Google Jamboard I currently use in my synchronous quantitative reasoning class, and it's incredibly powerful for my ability to present a topic. And then what I have is we have breakout rooms in Zoom. So what I do is you'll actually see, and you can look throughout the slides as we go through this. But I want to take a little time to ask you guys to reflect on some of the things that we talked about today. And just, again, I want to give some space for you all to really think about how you can implement some of these practices related to feedback. Because when I was preparing for this presentation, I looked through some of my groups, and when we finished this module, a lot of my faculty that I was working with said that providing feedback is one of the most difficult things that we found to implement. And I agree with them. So I want to really give some intentionality and some space behind what can you do to provide some quality feedback. And I want to give you the opportunity to kind of communicate with your colleagues. So we're going to enter into some breakout groups. I like to give you the opportunity to work with other people in this presentation. So the first thing I'd ask for you to do is just unmute yourself if you can. If you are in a situation where you may not feel comfortable, you know, I had lots of students who only feel comfortable using the chat, just express that. And then just in alphabetical order, according to first name, that just makes it easier in terms of who's going to go first. Just say who you are and what institution you're from. If you want to say what subject you're teaching in terms of Corequisite or planning to, that's a great way to do this. And then you're going to see when we go into the breakout groups, you're going to be assigned in Zoom. It'll say you're entering breakout group X, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure how many we're going to actually have here. Find the slide that corresponds to your breakout group. So I'm going to send the Jamboard to everybody now, and I'd like you to go ahead and click on it. And it functions a lot like a PowerPoint. So as soon as you click, I see a bunch of people have just started joining the Jamboard. And one of the things that are nice about the Jamboards is you have the ability to basically collaborate on this PowerPoint slide together. So when we enter into the breakout group, what I'm going to ask for you to do is navigate to the slide that corresponds to the breakout group you're in, and then unmute yourself in Zoom and go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody. If you're using Jamboards in your class or you're considering implementing this practice, one thing I've learned is that you want to give some time before you start the breakout groups. Because if you guys are using Zoom, once we enter Zoom, they're going to lose that link. Now, if they click share in the upper right-hand corner, they can share the link with their colleagues, and everybody can get a hold of the Zoom board or the Jamboard. But I want to give everybody the opportunity. Go ahead and click that link if you can. And then in a couple seconds, we're going to enter into the breakout group. So whenever you get to whatever specific breakout room you're in, make sure you navigate to the slide that corresponds to that breakout room. It often happens where people are kind of, you know, typing on somebody else's slides. So.
And Nicholas, we are going to have 5 breakout rooms with between 3 or 4 people per breakout room.
Okay. So if you look at the Jamboard and you're there, you'll see on the top, there's like, it says AQ Jamboard 1, and then there's arrows left and right, and you can navigate to the one specific to you. So if we have 5 groups, I'm going to go ahead and clear out the other ones. So we only have the specific number. So we are down to 5 groups. Perfect. And I will be kind of floating around the groups to make sure everybody's navigating okay and doing an all right job at figuring out where the stuff is. If I'm in the specific room checking in with you guys and you have a specific question that you didn't feel comfortable asking the group, you're welcome to ask me at that time. I think it would be, what this is we really want you to answer the questions about something you can take with you. So you can do this 2 ways. Underneath the pointer icon on the left-hand side, there is a Post-it note. And you can add a sticky note and just put what you plan to implement. And then kind of go around and answer those different questions. This is similar to what we do in our AQ reflections, where after we implement a teaching practice, or if we're planning to implement one in the future, we work ourselves through these reflections to make sure that we really do have some accountability behind wanting to do what we just spent 3 hours learning about. So Brandon, whenever you're ready, if anybody has specific questions, you're welcome to ask.
And one quick question, I will pause the report.
In the chat, why don't you give me a heads up? What did you guys think? What did you think about the Jamboard environment? Did you find this engaging? Did you think it was a practice that you could maybe take with you, or maybe just give me some general sense of that process? And if it took you a while and you didn't really understand, that's okay. That's okay. Again, we're throwing a lot at you today. We just wanted to see if you can. I want to expose you to a couple different things. So, cool. And, you know, I had a conversation with one of the breakout groups about whether this would work in asynchronous. I have not tried it yet, but I would love that. This is going to feed really well into one of the modules I'm about to start talking about, which is note-taking. So I share the link to the Jamboard in the chat during class. I also post that link in my LMS underneath the class folder for my synchronous class. So we really have this living document that students can go back to and look at for later problems if they want to go see that. So you kind of, it is part of their notes, and it is a collaborative level of notes, because one of the things that's really been hardest for me, and I've been kind of have a hard time with the pandemic and everything, is creating that sense of classroom community. There's a whole AQ module on that I could go into for hours, but I would say that this has been a really nice piece of technology to allow my students to have that sort of community. So we're going to flip through these and take a look at some of the things that you guys wrote. So group one, looks like the video feedback was pretty good. It seems like I hear you about the time for video feedback. Again, I would just say, try it before you decide it's too much time. And then if it is, then you can just kind of maybe streamline that, or you can maybe do it for a few students, or maybe for a few assignments. Let's see what the other groups did. So we're kind of, I like the outside of the box thinking. We're kind of like doing our mind mapping, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but getting students to be engaged, getting faculty outside their comfort zone. There's something that I read recently. I never run it back the same. I never run my course back the same. The first time I teach a course, it's never great. The second time, it's a little bit better. When I feel like I'm in my comfort zone, you're right. That's the exact same time that I put myself out of my comfort zone. It does help yourself to be familiar with technology. It is a technology that I think is useful. So nice job. I love the comment about compassion too. Awesome. I'm glad that you're picking up Jamboards. Technology is a challenge, but again, it's a challenge that if you approach it with communication, compassion, and understanding, I think most students are happy to be able to engage with it. And let's take a look at that last one. So the positive note is huge. I can't stress that enough. Giving positive feedback is really, really important. And just, you're right, it can take a lot of time for this, but it's our dialogue. It is, for my asynchronous students, it is sometimes the only conversation I have, because I have students that I cannot get on the phone, I cannot get to join Zoom, and I cannot get to read their email. So this feedback sometimes is one of the few ways I can have that dialogue with the student. And when you assign some feedback and you require students to go find it, I was talking to group one, and I wanted to share something that an anatomy and physiology instructor does. I've recognized that sometimes students don't know how to get to their feedback. So what he actually does is in his second assignment, so in his first assignment that the student submits, he puts a keyword on the bottom of their first assignment. And then in their second assignment, he requires that student to go find the keyword and put it in and fill it in as an answer to an assignment later. And I think that's really cool, because it just makes sure a student actually it checks in with them to make sure that they can get to that feedback and they know where it's at. So at least if you don't ever have them required to go find it, you have made sure they can find it at least once. So I think now we're going to transition into the next big topic related to some of the things I wanted to share with you. And I really picked this one because we're teaching a Corequisite course. And I had the opportunity to speak with some faculty at Nevada, in Nevada, before we got ready for this session. And I have the understanding that you guys don't have a prerequisite before your Corequisite. And one of the things I wanted to make sure was cognizant, and I made clear to you all, is that most of your faculty who are teaching the courses further along the sequence have an assumption of what the students are going to come in knowing how to do. Well, you don't get that luxury, right? I tell my students in my Corequisite, I assume you know nothing. Now, I know you do know something, but I am going to teach this course and scaffold this course in a way that assumes that you are coming in with a blank slate. Now, we both know that it's not, we can't start at 1 + 1 = 2 and get them all the way through a college algebra course, but it really challenges the idea of, we need to make sure we're teaching everything a student needs to be successful. So if we really want to measure how our students are doing with the content, and if we really truly want to know how our students are progressing, and progress is kind of a measure of how we're doing as an instructor, we owe it to ourselves and to our students to kind of check in with them and make sure they have an understanding of the skills necessary to do that analytical work that we're asking them to do in our class. It's what a co-requisite is. I'm going to make sure you can factor before I teach you how to find all the zeros of polynomial, because if you don't have that skill, you're never going to be able to do this third degree polynomial. Just like that, if a student cannot take notes, we're going to be in a bad place for those students, and we're not going to be able to measure whether the videos that they're watching are going to be effective for them and if they're going to actually be taking the key things with them. So a lack of a skill, if they don't have the skill, we can't measure the retention. And note-taking is a skill set that I feel like in a co-requisite course is worthwhile to take some time to dive into. So let's talk about some strategies for effective note-taking. The most common, and I don't know how many of you guys, if you can let me know in the chat, how many of you guys provide like a template of notes? Is it something common, or are they just open the YouTube video and they've got their notebook and they're just going to start from scratch? Is guided notes something that you guys have some experience with? Yes, no, maybe? Is that like a practice? Most people, that's a practice that is pretty common. And I think that's kind of a baseline of where we need to start. Because if we don't do that, when you have the big word problem, like in my statistics classes, sometimes it's a paragraph long filled with data. They never write that paragraph out. So at least providing that to them is a helpful thing. I like to not call them guided notes. We actually call them a collaborative text. So that's a good thing. You want to structure your notes in a way so that you're not just they're focused on mimicking examples. So I'm going to give you an anecdote that I noticed in my first time I taught co-requisites, and I did a flipped classroom model. So my students were watching the videos, lecture videos outside, and then coming in and we were doing collaborative activities. And I was checking their notes every day to make sure. And what I saw was I was on my way to teach my morning class. I had a student from my afternoon class sitting on a chair, and he had his phone in his lap and he was taking the notes, and he did not have his headphones in. And you know what that told me? That student was not listening to what I took all that time to say. They were just writing down what I was writing down, and they were going with it. There are some ways to like introduce questions if they're embedded in your LMS, or what I'm going to suggest is maybe put some focused questions, or leave some pieces of those guided notes blank, or put a now you try these into those notes that you ask them to fill out, so that you can really check in to make sure that they are engaging with those videos. There's lots of different ways to engage with videos. If you want to get into that, I'd love to talk more about that, but we want to figure out ways to really make sure that they're really locked into those. So focus questions are a great way to do that. And so Daniel said, I've been doing this for my co-requisite pilot, and I do not do that for my regular classes. Some of you, if you have not taught co-requisites and you have faculty that focus in the upper level courses, I just want to express a concern and something to be aware of once you start really getting into this work. And it's this: there are some faculty who do not view co-requisites as effective because they view what you're doing as hand-holding. Now, I firmly disagree with that, but I also have to hear what they're saying because I'm going to have students who end up in that course later. So we want to provide these scaffolds, but it may be worthwhile in a co-requisite to start with heavy structure and then slowly take those scaffolds down so that the student can stand on their own and they have some practices to take with them into other courses when they may not see as much help in addressing of the prerequisite topics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some ways that we can do that as well. So the first way this is just baseline template, right? Guided notes. We like to call it a collaborative text because we don't require a physical textbook for my college algebra co-requisite. They build this together. So they actually just work through this and just they fill these out as long as we go. And again, I am working away from this to put more kind of summary and focus questions that are not in the video that they're going to fill out. And again, I just want to stress to you, I have my students take pictures of these and submit them, and I look at them. I don't provide as much feedback as I do on lower stakes assessments, but this is a data point, and I want to go back to feedback and talk about how this is an important data point. Because when I have a student bomb a quiz, I'll go look at that notes a little bit more carefully. Normally, I'm just checking notes for completion and giving them the points. But when a student does poorly on a quiz, you now have a data point to go back to say, let's go look at what their notes look like. And a lot of times their notes are a little weak on that section, and then you can tie those things together. We need to work on focusing on helping them take better notes so that they are getting more out of those things that you're asking them to watch. So those focus questions are really, really important. Put some now you try these in there. So these are all math specific examples. The next one is just kind of, I don't know if you've heard of this, Cornell Note-Taking is pretty common. I know it shows up a lot in student success skills courses. Cornell Note-Taking is just a method that has been developed. Research shows it really does a good job of helping students connect to the content. The left-hand side is just going to be contained for questions. The bottom has a summary portion. And then the right-hand side is going to be the meat of the notes. So that's going to be the problems that you're going to be working out in class. You might have a heading and some main topics on the top, but they're going to be taking those notes in the right-hand side. And then they're going to be doing a summary discussion later. And then as they're working through the video, they have questions, they can hit pause on the video and kind of write some questions over the left-hand side. As I was working on this presentation though, had a grand unifying theory of taking my guided notes and blending them into my Cornell Note-Taking method. And I think I actually want to redo my guided notes to mimic this method, where I do have the problems in there. And let me say, it's worth providing guided notes specifically when you're doing graphing, because I've noticed that the graphing gets really bad and a lot of times students just won't graph if you don't have that Cartesian grid provided. But I'm going to provide this, and I'm going to provide it in a pretty structured environment earlier. Then as the semester goes on, my summary questions, or now you try these, might just turn into the word summary and say, write a summary here. And I think this is a good way to kind of walk that scaffolding back slowly. And then maybe at the end of the semester, you just give them the blank template of the Cornell Note method. And then when they get to those other classes, you have helped them develop a skill that they can take forward into those classes, that even if the instructor is not going to provide guided notes to them, they have a method that they can be standing on to use. Okay. I think that really this is a nice skill that would translate up the sequence in their courses and really be effective for them later. So when I was doing some research for this presentation, I tried this one. You will notice that my student did point out that I spelled the word coupon incorrectly. Before you let me know in the chat or in my feedback later that I did spell coupon incorrectly. I have a lady who wants to be an editor and she's taking my quantitative reasoning class. But this is called four squares and a diamond. And what I like about this is really nice for like kind of the creative thinkers outside of the box, because they can actually go attack this from any direction. They can go towards this in really any facet they might like. So the upper right-hand corner is just a brainstorm, just conceptually, what would you do? Up in the left-hand corner is kind of asking them to draw on prior knowledge. Thanks, Eric. I'm sure there's more in there. There's a triad here in the lower left-hand corner, and then on the right-hand side allows them to pull out some, what do you need to know? What do we need to do better? You know, basically provide some feedback and provide some pain points that you may need to address later. This is something that, again, may not be available in future courses, but might be a nice way to get some students thinking about problem solving and how you might want to get them problem solving. When you get the PDF of this presentation today, just know that all of these come from some pretty fleshed out research, and I have links to that research in the PowerPoint itself. So if you want to dig into any of these methods, you could probably Google them, but I have some links to provide, as well as I found a gentleman who did his research on math note-taking that I had a great time reading a couple weeks ago, and it was very insightful, and these were some of the questions that were being addressed. All right, I love this next one. I'm actually using this next week, but the next one is called a mind map. And so I am currently teaching graphing rational functions. Anybody who has taught graphing rational functions, do you guys hear me that that's a pretty tough topic to get through with students? If anybody has some really great strategies that they're using, I'd love to talk. I've been working on this. I try to get better at this every semester, and this was a skill, or this was a tool that I thought was really nice, because a problem with rational functions is there's just a lot of pieces that go into it. I don't know, when do I have to look at the degree? When do I set the numerator equal to 0? When do I plug in 0 for x? How do I understand that? So what I'm going to be doing next week for my worksheet of the day for my college algebra students is they're actually going to be making a mind map. So I'm going to put this central image. It's from a gentleman. I don't want to get his name wrong, so let me make sure. He's awesome, Tony Buzan, and I linked to a YouTube video that goes deeper into this concept. He studied a lot about how people think and how they learn, and this kind of, you put the center is like the central like the center of the city. And then from there, it branches out into kind of like, what makes this up? And then from there, you kind of have the pieces that come off of that what make up those pieces. And it really helps you revolve around a central idea. I think this is going to help my students understand how to graph rational functions better, because they might actually be able to see, okay, where's one of them? So vertical asymptotes. Okay, so that's that vertical line. Sometimes there's more than one of them. Set the denominator equal to 0. And there's something about checking for holes, because I have a lot of times the students, if there's a hole in a rational function, they try to associate that with a vertical asymptote when it's not. I don't know if you guys see that as a common error, but having them add those things in there. Now I'm going to ask them to create those sub branches, but I'm going to have basically the center part filled in, and then I'm going to tell them what goes in each of those bubbles, and I'm going to make them add those branches off for what they associate with those particular pieces of the problem. And I think a mind map is a great way to take something when you're working in math and there's multiple concepts that flow into one overall theme. Have a student do a mind map with this and see if you can kind of put that together into, you know, help them visual. I think this is going to help my students visualize this concept, which again, they struggle with. We're into this, and I'm getting a lot of emails of students wanting to pull their hair out with this. So I'm hoping it does a better job. Just like with providing feedback, you got to put that carrot there. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but students do not do optional. That's a common theme that I've understood in higher education is students don't do optional. And I've got to be honest, when we transitioned to online, so our college went remote in the middle of a semester. So I had students that went away for spring break and then came back and they were digital students. And one of the things that happened was we were checking notebooks each day or every couple days, and those notebook checks went away. And I sensed that their note-taking skills kind of diminished. So you have to do the same thing. Take those pictures, ask them to submit that work, okay? Once you get them to submit that work, then again, you have another thing to go back and take a look at. One thing you definitely want to do is share the research behind why note-taking is effective. I'm going to share another WOD. This is, again, a non-math one, but I want to share a WOD that we have. So we will put that document in, and it really teaches you how the brain learns, and it focuses in on kind of why we do what we do. And I think that's an important thing to convey to students, especially in a Corequisite course. Incentivizing note-taking with points. We assign a small amount of points for note-taking. It's you know, again, weighted grades, they really don't know what a point stands for. So it's a nice thing to have in there because they want to get all the points they can. I actually want to take a second and we're going to play a video that goes through some of these, because the next one, there is a great example of incentivizing note-taking with open note assessments. And I want to give you opportunity to get the voice of some of the other people from AQ who really do a good job of explaining some of this stuff.
After my students watch the video, they are supposed to read the textbook and take the quiz. What I've begun doing is ask them to take notes and send me a picture of their notes, just so that I know they actually were actively engaged. And the pictures I'm getting now are really funny because they like to use different color markers and show me pictures they're drawing in their notes. I just need to see that they've done it and give them, you know, credit that they took notes and they showed it to me. I think it helps them to be more actively engaged.
So requiring it makes you, and being graded on it, makes you think twice about what you're writing down in your notes. Are the points that you're writing down important? So it is important to take notes, and her asking us and grading us on taking pictures of our notes, you want her to approve of what you're doing.
I let the students use the quizzes, the notes for quizzes, because I trick them into learning. First, they have to pay attention and write notes. And if they know they're going to use the notes for the quiz, they pay attention and take good notes. And then they have to use their notes for the quizzes. They have to search their notes again. So this is my way of getting repetition into the class. So take your notes, review your notes, make a study guide from your notes, and then search your notes again when you get the quiz. It's repetition, and I think repetition is really important for learning.
She'll let you know throughout her teaching, in her videos, she'll let you know what to remember. The key points that she wants you to remember, she'll note those, and she'll ask you to make note of them. And before you even have the quiz, you already know basically what's probably going to be on the quiz. It's very helpful.
So being able to use your notes on a quiz and also having your professor look at your notes really encourages you to take better notes, because you're able to, you know that, for one, you know your professor's going to be looking at them, so you want your notes to look good for that reason, but also you want to take really good notes so that you're able to do really well on the quizzes. And it kind of almost in a way forces you to do really good note-taking skills, and and then in that sense you're also digesting the information more because you're taking really good concise notes.
All right, guys, so we have a test coming up, and one thing that you can use on the test is a self-created reference card. So how you should put your reference card together is, while you're completing your practice test, any questions that you kind of struggle with, you might want to put some helpful hints from those down on your reference card. And I also recommend going back over the chapter assignments, the homework assignments, and anything that kind of gave you pause while completing those, you might want to put on your reference card too. A reference card for me is a resource that I have students create prior to end of the unit assessments. And on the reference card, students just put helpful hints to help them on the test. It is generally formulas or just little helpful hints that's going to get them over the hump on a problem that they may struggle on. Just because you can't fit it on your reference card, this shouldn't be the only piece of paper that you're using while you're studying. Write copious notes, work out all the problems, even if you can't use them on the test, because you'll have a copy of those in your brain from doing your studying, even if it's not on your reference card. So they have an abundance of written, worked problems from doing the practice test and from doing their homework assignments, but they're kind of scanning through that and saying, oh, this one kind of gave me pause the most, and selecting just some critical formulas or reminders that they're going to put on their reference card.
Building a reference card is very helpful for a test because it makes you think, like, in the sense of, will this be on the test, and how important. It makes you pick out those important details throughout the material that you are studying and learning for, and it helps you better retain it, because I learned that writing it down and reading at the same time is better than just reading it one time or a couple of times, but actually writing helps you remember.
I don't feel like this changes the purpose of the assignment at all or waters it down in any way, because the purpose was to get them to read, and having them use their notes is not changing the fact that they've read. It's just more evidence that they've read.
So the last two things I really wanted to touch on were incentivizing note-taking with open notes assessments. One of the nice things about this is, again, it does reinforce that idea. When I talked about giving feedback earlier, when I asked them to go back and rework some of the problems they missed throughout the course, I asked them to identify where in the notes that we addressed that topic. Again, you're sneakily pointing back to that and say, go back to that. A lot of students don't really recognize the purpose of notes. So the more opportunity you can provide to get students to use them, the better that is. And when you can kind of sneakily structure that into the course itself, it can be a really, really effective way to do that. The last thing is, I've got to be honest with you, my previous institution was okay with the idea of a self-created reference card, but we went through a debate. And I know that reference cards can be hot topics for people. So what I want to say is, if able to, you can use it for lower stakes assessments, and then again, kind of work away from that. When I was so before I worked with a department that my department currently does not approve those. And again, that's an institution decision that you guys have to make. One of the things that I recognize, if you do want to have that conversation with your colleagues, is a comment I heard more often than anything else is when I allowed those self-created reference cards, my students would turn in their exam and say, you know, I never even really used this thing. And again, I think that incentivizers, that tells you that that practice really does work to help internalize that process. So we are coming close to the end of our time. I would really encourage you, if possible, I don't think we have enough time quite yet to do this, but there is an aspect of the AQ course that I love, and it's called Observe and Analyze. So there is a short video on the next slide that I for the sake of time, I don't necessarily want to go through that whole video, but what it does is you watch an instructor do something, and the instructor does a pretty good job, and then you write about what they could do better and what they did well. And I think that's an effective way to reflect on your own practice by seeing somebody else do something. So when you do get the PowerPoints, I encourage you to take the time to go through that OAN to kind of get a feel of what that looks like. But in the last 5 minutes, Brandon, I just kind of want to maybe open those breakout groups up for a second. Or do you think we're running short on time for that?
We have about 10 minutes total. So if we could do it for just about 3 to 5 minutes, I think that would work.
Yeah, so let's just do 3 minutes. And if we can have everybody in their breakout group, just from that note-taking strategy, if you guys could just share one practice that you felt was effective that you may try to use. And we'll do 3 minutes, and then we'll come back, and then we'll wrap.
And we're back.
Okay, so I just want to thank you guys. I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about what we can do to become better at what we do. And just in conclusion, to wrap this up, feedback is one of these, it's our conversation with students. So take the time. When I sit down to grade, I think I remind myself of that when I start to pick the pencil up and go through and grade everything. And I really, really try to just say that to myself, because I think it does a better job of helping me provide good feedback. And those note-taking, as far as a co-requisite goes, it's a skill that we should be addressing. It's important that we're not only teaching math, but we're also teaching the skills for how students can be successful in future math courses. So the next slide, it's just, I'm gonna turn this over to Penny. She's gonna talk a little bit more about AQ, and my email is on the last slide. If you wanna talk more about any aspect that I've talked about today, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I know there's a lot here. Try to take one thing and use it as soon as possible.
Nick, I just want to thank you for leading today's presentation and share with the folks in the audience that people like Nick are the people who we put on video along with experts so that you can learn evidence-based practices from practitioners, from people actually doing this in their classroom. And I bet you could imagine that actually having a video of watching Nick do some of the things he talked about today with his students and hearing from his students, like you did some of the videos, would be really helpful in learning these practices. So our courses are aligned to the framework you see here. What we did was work with scholars in teaching and learning across the country to identify, what's the core set? What's the foundational set of knowledge and skills you need to be effective in the college classroom? And this framework, again, blessed by scholars in teaching and learning across the country, outlines that core set. And our courses, both a course focused on face-to-face with online resources and a course focused on online with face-to-face resources, address each and every one of these topic areas. You can see the note-taking module that's in there that Nick referred to, and the feedback module that's in there that Nick referred to. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and If you have interest in AQ modules and learning, you can go to our website. I'm sure we'll put that up in the chat and learn more about us. And we'd be happy to engage you in a conversation. I appreciate everybody being part of this today.
Thank you so much, Penny, and a huge thanks to Nick for leading this session today. Very informative. We saw a lot of engagement going on, and we appreciate that. In the chat, you'll see I did put a link for an evaluation. We would love it if you could just take a few minutes. It really means a lot, particularly when you have a strong presenter as Nick, so we can hear what you thought. I also put a flyer for the rest of the professional development, both the ones that are coming up in April, as well as ones in the past, so you can check those out on the NSHE CoRec website or on their YouTube channel. And again, I want to offer a huge thank you on behalf of everyone here to AQ, to Penny, and to Nick, and the whole team behind Christine, Angelica, those who are supporting them. So everyone, it's Friday. It's been a long week. Enjoy. Have a great weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.